criminal trials are on the Daily Debrief tonight. A mother breaks down and leaves a courtroom as prosecutors show jurors the belt they say a killer used to murder her 12-year-old daughter. Also, a murder defendant blames her lover in the case of a military love triangle. And we look further into the sentencing hearing for a teacher who admitted to sexually abusing her 13-year-old student. Plus, sentencing for the man who slammed into Charlottesville protesters. The Daily Debrief recaps the day in court. It's Monday, July 15th. Welcome to the Debrief, everybody. Rachel Stockman, Norman Williams joining us here in New York. Ashley Wilcott will be with us in just a moment. A Michigan woman is charged with premeditated murder in the so-called case of a military love triangle. Camilla Hassel is accused of encouraging her lover, Jeremy Cuellar, to murder her husband, Tyrone Hassel III. Let's begin with the state's opening statement.
You will find that he was the victim of a planned killing. The woman responsible for that killing is seated right there. The defendant. You'll find she had murder on her mind and betrayal in her heart. And you'll hear all about this plan. You'll hear when it was started, talking about it, devising it. And you're going to hear all of this out of her own mouth, in her own words, because she admitted to all of it.
The defense says Camilla Hassel shouldn't be tried on murder charges because she's not the one who pulled the trigger. They say it was her lover and he bragged about it.
He is clearly involved in this. He's clearly responsible for this. But just because he's responsible does not mean Camilla Hassel's involved. I think the evidence will clearly establish that Jeremy Cuellar is a full-blown psychopath. What he does, ladies and gentlemen, is Specialist Hamilton. He's going to come up here and he's going to tell you Jeremy Cuellar told him, straight up told him in June of last year, I'm going to do this. I am going to kill this guy. And I'm going to do so because I want to be with Camilla.
Strong testimony in that case. And now to the trial of a Georgia couple accused of murdering their 2-year-old foster child. Joseph and Jennifer Rosenbaum face a mix of murder and other related charges over the death of Layla Marie Daniel. Authorities say the little girl died from blunt force trauma to the abdomen, a cut pancreas, and other abuse. The defendants say the girl died accidentally by choking on a piece of chicken and that she was further injured during CPR. The defense forced a social worker to testify that the victim should never have been placed with the Rosenbaums in the first place.
Was there any indication that you do recall that the Rosenbaums would not have been approved or should not have been approved in this home study?
There was concerns. They did not, my staff, Tamara Warner, did not screen Miss Rosenbaum's maiden name. And had she been screened her maiden name, her foster care history would have come up and I would not have approved her on that alone.
But with regards to the home visit, the house itself, was there anything wrong with the house?
Not to my knowledge, no, but it's more than a house, ma'am, that we do approval for.
But your people did approve it, didn't they?
It's not approved because I didn't approve it.
You didn't approve it, but somebody approved it.
Who did not have the authority to approve?
What steps do you take to make sure that that doesn't happen?
That's an HR matter with DFACS. That goes over my head.
The tactic there might be to blame the system. Another witness injected racial undertones into the case. She said defendant Jennifer Rosenbaum accused another woman of being a racist, but the other woman completely denied it.
And what did Jennifer Rosenbaum tell you about Peggy Banks?
She was one of the person who related to me that Miss Banks did not want to have anything to do with Layla.
That was told to you by Jennifer Rosenbaum?
Yes, ma'am.
What else did she tell you about Miss Banks?
She didn't like black people. She did not like black people.
That Miss Banks?
Yes.
And did she tell you where that information came from?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever address that with Miss Banks?
Sure I did.
What did you, how did you address it with Miss Banks?
I just met her one of the days when she came to pick me up. I let her know. I said, listen, I say, I do what I do because I love doing what I do. And I don't care if the child is green, pink, yellow, purple. I don't see color. I'm here to help.
And what was Ms. Banks' response?
She was very remorseful. She said to me that she never, ever, ever mentioned anything like that to Jennifer.
So, is the defendant a liar? We'll continue to monitor that case. And before we jump into our third trial tonight, let's loop back to the sentencing hearing for the Arizona teacher who admitted to sex crimes with a 13-year-old student. Brittany Zamora pleaded guilty to sexual conduct with a minor, public indecency, and molestation. The judge did not allow independent recording equipment inside the hearing. All the judge allowed was a still camera. You're looking at those images now. And the judge released low-quality video recordings from a courtroom camera. This material came in late Friday, so we weren't able to dive into all of it last week, but we're going to bring you more of it tonight, including these statements from the victim's father and stepmother. Part of it is aimed at the court, part of it aimed straight at the defendant.
Our son, on the other hand, has been stripped of and will never recover the innocence of his childhood. He will miss out on so many important emotions and feelings when it comes to relationships with women throughout the rest of his life. Over the course of many months, this woman intentionally set out to groom our son for her own twisted pleasures under the guise of being a trusted teacher, caretaker, and school district representative. She offered to tutor our son after hours. She offered to babysit our other small children. Little did we know at the time, it was all part of an orchestrated plan to rob our son of his childhood innocence. This monster cannot be trusted around any children at all, period. She preys on the innocence of children. She knows how to manipulate and gain the trust of others around her with only a grotesque and disturbing agenda in mind. I pray that you never have the blessing to have your own child. I hope you rot in your prison cell for at least the next 236,520 hours, and you spend every one of those hours praying for forgiveness for the horror and pain that you have caused us.
If you think that was powerful, listen to this one. The mother of Zamora's second victim spoke directly.
He witnessed sexual acts between Miss Zamora and the other victim that no child should ever have to encounter. At times he was told to be a lookout. He felt so uncomfortable that he removed himself the second time. Instead of teaching subjects like math and English, she showed him pictures and asked him about his private parts. She tried to groom my child into believing that this behavior was okay. We tell our children to listen to their teachers, and Miss Zamora used her position as a teacher to keep my son quiet by telling him that she would be thrown in jail if her secret got out. She knew this was wrong. She's a true definition of a child predator. Miss Zamora starts a friendship with these boys and gains their trust and then lures them in for her own sick sexual desires. Everything she did was strategically planned for only one outcome, sex with a child. An example needs to be made of Brittany Zamora. She's a woman of position and power and used it to molest a child. She's a pedophile and is no different than if a man were sitting in her place right now. Let this sink into your head, Brittany. Your mind is foul, your heart is ugly, and you disgust me. You should be embarrassed and ashamed of yourself. You deserve to leave prison at an age where you cannot bear children of your own. You deserve to spend the next 27 Christmases alone, the next 27 birthdays alone in your cell with no family and no friends to comfort you. Brittany Zamora, your secret is out. The world knows you are a child molester. And while you sit in your cell and think that maybe things will get better, they won't. You are forever labeled a child molester, and everyone hates a child molester.
Wow. Zamora's plea deal with prosecutors suggested a 30-year sentence, but the judge gave her 20 years, the minimum. Here is most of Brittany Zamora's statement to the judge.
I want to start off by apologizing to the victim and his family. I'm sorry for any undue stress or pain that I may have caused. I'm ashamed of my actions and am completely remorseful and truly regret what took place. I'm known to be a responsible, caring, happy, and thoughtful person. My actions were completely out of character for me. As an adult and teacher, I am meant to set an example and I did not follow according to that expectation. Prior to this incident, I have been an amazing teacher and citizen. I started programs while teaching to help stop bullying, teach girls about nutrition, fitness, create fundraisers to help with autism, and help families in need. Filled 25 plus desks with school supplies each year, and even won Teacher of the Year in 2016. As far as a citizen goes, I've lived my life respecting and trying to obey every law. I am not a threat to society by any means. On the contrary, I have tried to help our society as much as I can. This includes helping out the homeless, volunteering for the city, and giving time to assist with church programs. A life that I've been working so hard to set up for a successful and bountiful future. I would do anything to re-enter society sooner for a second chance. This sentencing is not only taking decades of my own life and experiences away, but those of my loved ones as well. As stated earlier, I never want to hurt anyone, and it tears me apart to know that I have. And I'm deeply sorry. Going forward, I would like to attend counseling and all other required courses, obtain a new degree, and seek new employment. I have already relinquished my teaching certification. My hope is to rejoin society a better and more grateful person. Your Honor, I know the state did not take my medication and assessments into consideration, but I hope you can. I am a good and genuine person who made a mistake and regrets it deeply. I ask that you please have leniency in regard to my sentencing, that you see me as a person with a hopeful future and not just another number or case.
Let's bring the panel in to discuss this case. Judge Ashley Wilcott, attorney Norman Williams, and Law&Crime president Rachel Stockman with me tonight. So Rachel, Zamora received a 20-year sentence here. Many others in her shoes have received 3 years, 10 years, etc. So is her sentence fair given what you just heard?
Well, listen, given what I just heard, I do think it's fair. And I think a lot of times we have to think this through the lens. If this was a male teacher doing this to young teenage girls, I don't think the sentiment would have so much sympathy. The public sentiment would have so much sympathy for her. This woman that you're seeing her mugshot of was a predator who preyed on young children. So I think 20 years is more than enough. Maybe she should have gotten more to think about what she did to these children.
You know, when I looked at the comparative sentencing, you know, she did get a lot more than other people similarly situated. But Norman Williams, I have to ask you this. If you represented Brittany Zamora, would you have counseled her to give that statement, or would you have said, absolutely not, this needs to change?
No, the red pen would have been flying in her statement. But she said too many things that the average pedophile says. Also, too, I think as a society, we're just starting to understand what a pedophile really is. And it's not about making a bad choice. It's about not being able to control a sexual impulse that's illegal.
Norman Williams, so you see some bad things potentially with this statement here. Judge Wilcott, you're the one that sits with the robe of justice. You listen to these statements. What do you make of what was said here, both by the victims' families and by the defendant? Do you give the defendant any credit here?
Well, let's talk about victims' families first, Aaron. I mean, my goodness, when you hear that and the emotion behind it, those are impactful to a jury. Here's the problem with the defense and the defendant's statement specifically is that while she says she's remorseful, she also followed that up and said, I am by all means not a threat to society. Guess what? She is a perpetrator. And so as a result, it took any credibility of her away. I see, and I'm going to agree with Norman in this case, a lot of defendants' statements that they make are exactly like the one she just made when they're a perpetrator and they groom. They're satisfying a sexual urge. And so in their mind, they've done nothing wrong. To me, that's what it sounded like she was saying here.
So Judge Wilcott, if you had the chance to pass judgment as to sentence here, what would you do?
Listen, 20 years is a lot, but I don't think it's out of the realm of fair. When she faced 40 years, she was only given half that time, a 13-year-old victim with another victim standing guard more than once. I think this is a reasonable sentence. I would do the same.
Judge Wilcott, thanks for that, and thanks to the panel. And still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, an incredibly long sentence for the man who rammed his car into a group of counter-protesters in Charlottesville, Virginia. Plus, closing arguments in the case of a Tennessee man accused of murdering a 12-year-old. That case and more in just a moment. A second sentencing for the man who rammed his car into a group of counter-protesters 2 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia. James Alex Fields Jr. will spend life plus 419 years in prison on state charges related to the deadly attack. A federal judge sentenced him to life on hate crimes charges last month. Meanwhile, the body of a Louisiana civil rights leader has turned up in the trunk of a car in Baton Rouge. Sadie Roberts Joseph died of traumatic asphyxia, including suffocation, an autopsy found today. Police say they've been bombarded with tips and calls in remembrance in her honor. Accused millionaire pedophile Jeffrey Epstein kept a foreign passport, diamonds, and piles of cash inside his New York mansion, prosecutors today revealed. Epstein is accused of sex crimes in federal court, where prosecutors want to keep him locked up before trial because they say he has the means and the planes to pose a flight risk, literally. Law&Crime trial analyst Gene Rossi agreed that there are plenty of good reasons to keep Epstein in jail pending trial.
Number one, he is an incredible risk of flight. He's 66 years old. He is facing incredibly significant evidence of guilt. If he's convicted, he will serve at least 15 to 20 years in prison. That's a life sentence. Number two, and this is the most important in addition to risk of flight, danger to the community involves tampering with witnesses. When he's in jail, he can only make one call, and that's to his attorneys. He can get visitors, but that call is going to be recorded. So in jail, he's limited extremely. But when he's at home, he can use a cell phone. He can get access to a computer. He could get visitors, and he could be up to no good.
Those words from Gene Rossi, our trial analyst. Closing arguments now in the case of a Tennessee man accused of murdering a 12-year-old girl. Roy Coons Jr. is accused of killing Joanna Arteaga by beating and strangling her. Arteaga was home from school when she texted her mother that someone was knocking on her door at 4:15 p.m. and she thought the person knocking was the man who mowed the family's lawn. That's the defendant. Joanna's mother found her dead 2.5 hours later. The defendant's DNA was on a windowsill on the victim's body and on a discarded cigarette at the crime scene. The victim's mother broke down during the state's rebuttal when prosecutors showed the jury her daughter's own Taekwondo belt that was used to strangle her.
It signified destruction and death. Why am I showing this? This is not an appeal for emotion. Neither was a 911 call. No one enjoys that. One thing came very clear from that 911 call. Ms. Velasquez encountered this. She removed this. She took the 2 knots out and she removed it from being wrapped twice around her daughter's her neck. And her DNA is not on here.
The prosecutor was trying to show there that it was no surprise the defendant's DNA was not found on the belt, since the victim's mother's DNA wasn't on it either, even though she touched it. The defense said police overlooked other suspects and made too big of a deal about the defendant's DNA being at the scene. The DNA was there, the defense says, because Coons did construction work at that house.
The other part that the state's not wanting to talk about is the fact that we have 3 other known hits in CODIS to people's DNA that were in that trailer, one of which was on the bare skin of Joanna Arteaga. The left breast swab, it's in the evidence, you can look at it. They got a hit on someone named Jerry Claiborne. They also got a hit on 2 people, Billy Trapani, who's in prison, and another guy named Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, as far as the detective knew, was supposed to have been on probation somewhere. They couldn't locate him. But yet, the man who did work in that trailer for nearly 15 years, who had a microscopic amount of DNA partially matching him on her body, is supposed to be the killer in this case. Mr. Coons did work in that trailer for years. Now, the state in their opening said, well, they didn't find his DNA anywhere else, but they didn't check anywhere else. And then you got the DNA of these 3 other people who have no reason to have been there and who were not followed up on to exclude that he's having been involved in this. Because they did get tunnel vision in this case.
Let's bring the panel in one last time on this case. Norman Williams, you're the defense attorney here tonight. So the defense called the defendant's father to testify for the defense to try to downplay the state's evidence and say, look, there are innocent explanations. You just heard the argument. Does it hold water? Do you buy it?
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't know when the DNA was deposited. If there are other distinct donors that deposited their DNA in the same site, you have to go after everybody.
Exactly. Okay, look, the defense's job is to try to poke reasonable doubt into this case. Judge Wilcott, my thing goes back to the statements of people in this homeless camp. So the defendant basically gives up his life. He starts living in a homeless camp, and he starts talking to people about committing murder, asking if someone can be forgived for that. You know, they got up there and testified to this. What do you make of that?
Well, again, so that happened after the crime, that he engaged in that behavior that was suspicious. But I think, again, it's circumstantial evidence. We have to look at all of these pieces. And when you look at that behavior in conjunction with the fact there was DNA on the body, in conjunction with the fact the mother's DNA wasn't on the belt, so maybe his wasn't either, all of this could amount to enough circumstantial evidence in this case.
In other words, evidence for a conviction.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that they may not see the fact that there were other people's DNA that ran through CODIS with his as reasonable doubt.
Exactly. Rachel Stockman of Law&Crime here. I'm thinking this is a pretty strong case for the state. I expect a conviction here because I think the reasonable doubt just isn't strong enough, and realize that it's the state burden. What do you make?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you and Ashley here. I think that there is enough evidence that I believe the jurors are going to convict Roy Coons, because you do have that DNA evidence. While the defense is trying to explain it away, I think jurors have a very difficult time doing that, especially when you have other testimony corroborating his story.
Exactly. Rachel Stockman, I agree with you. Norman Williams, the defense is doing the best it can. That's it for us on The Debrief, though. Have a good evening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.